Patty, we heard almost we did hear two different speeches from Donald Trump today.
And the day is young.
And I know we still have, I think, 5 more speeches from him to come. But we heard that very sort of presidential, traditional inaugural address, but with a lot of policy points in it as well earlier. And then the unscripted remarks was more classic Trump, but we still learned quite a lot about what he has in mind for this country.
Yeah, I mean, the unscripted part was more about his grievances. We would have won California, we would have won the 2020 election. The people that have been pardoned by Joe Biden. So some of the kind of more conventional Trump in that way. I mean, even the inaugural address was not that conventional in the sense that you don't often get a president standing there at inauguration saying they're going to take the Panama Canal. I haven't heard that before,
or
for
rename
example,
the Gulf of Mexico.
or rename the Gulf of Mexico. So with Trump, I think it's always worth, and one thing I learned from having covered him the first time, is to really make a distinction between what he says and what he does. So there will be a lot of attention out of this inaugural address on the Panama Canal, I just mentioned it, on the Gulf of Mexico. But what's going to happen actually in terms of economic policy? What is he going to do about those tariffs? What's going to happen for the American people in terms of bringing down prices, which was a big reason why he was elected? We've heard a lot about the cultural issues, and we saw that during the address. He addressed that, and that got a big round of applause. But so far, we don't know what the economic plan is yet. What's he actually going to do to bring those prices down, which is why a lot of Americans voted for him. And we may have to wait. You know, I think with Trump, you have to have a certain amount of patience. Today is kind of, as they said, shock and awe. But let's see what actually comes out of this.
And on that revenue raising, he outlined again in his inaugural address, which is kind of unusual to do this, what he called an external revenue service, where he's going to make other countries pay into this fund on taxes, on tariffs, that he said he's sick of the American people, their tax money going elsewhere.
Yes, although what we haven't had yet, and there are several more hours left, and we've got to get to the Capitol Arena where he's going to make a speech, and we're not expecting to have, is an announcement of 25% tariffs, for example, on Mexico and Canada on day one, or 10% across the board tariffs on all imports into the United States. And I think what's happening, my understanding from talking to people around Trump, is that there is a debate going on within the economic team about how quickly to roll out those tariffs and what the scale of them is going to be in the end. Clearly, President Trump likes them, but there is also the risk that the speech, as Stephanie Murphy was saying, there are contradictions in this speech. He was elected to bring down prices. Jack up tariffs on food. America's a food importer. You drive up tariffs on proteins coming into the United States, you could drive up prices. So that's the kind of debate that's happening. I think always watch what happens and not just what is said.
And he said that himself actually in those remarks, the second remark, saying actions speak more than words, and in reference to those who've been charged and arrested with January 6th offences.
Yes, I mean, we haven't had the final word on that again today. Maybe that's going to be.
He said it's coming later.
It's coming later, so let's watch what happens. How many of them get released? I mean, I think there was clear. I thought it was interesting that in those unscripted remarks, there was a certain amount of anger towards Joe Biden for the pardons towards his family and towards General Milley, and we heard that specifically towards Dr. Fauci. And whether that changes his calculation when it comes to January 6th, it's possible that he does. You know, you did this, and therefore I can do. And it is extraordinary for a president, minutes before they lose the office of the presidency, to pardon preemptively all of their members of their family, when Joe Biden himself said he didn't like the look of Donald Trump doing that back in 2020. So when Donald Trump left office, so there's a contradiction there in Joe. We're living in an era where power is being consolidated in the executive office and in the office of the presidency, and I think you see the through line there from Donald Trump to Joe Biden did it, and now Donald Trump is going to do it again.
We'll be speaking about this in the weeks and months ahead. So just to ask you briefly on those pardons that Joe Biden issued, given, as you say, what he has said about them in the past, is that damaging for the Democrats in terms of the rebuilding that they're trying to do? We've seen Joe Biden fly off now, and there's no obvious leader for the party.
Well, it's interesting that a Democrat actually texted me when those pardons happened and said they didn't like the look of this. That is not something they liked. I think they understand the Milley and the Fauci and the January the 6th committee pardons more than they do the pardons of Joe Biden's family. I mean, the crime narrative around Joe Biden's family, which, there aren't charges against these members of Joe Biden's families. There were investigations against one of them from the House Republicans, but there haven't been charges. That's a narrative that Democrats would like to now move on from, as they would like to move on from many things surrounding this presidency.
They will be, because that presidency is over now. It's President Donald Trump now. I want to go to Chicago to our news correspondent, Carl Nasman, because, of course, course, we've heard much about these immigration measures from the President himself in his inaugural address and for what may lie ahead through today and the coming days. Speaking of the potential raids in some of these so-called sanctuary cities. So, Carl, what can you tell us about what's going on in Chicago at the moment?
Yeah, well, I'm obviously there in Washington, D.C. It's all about the inauguration of Donald Trump, the ceremony's there. But here in Chicago, just an hour or so ago, a massive protest really making its way through the downtown streets, ending up here at Trump Tower itself, which is right along the Chicago River. There were hundreds of people, I have to say, braving the cold. It might even be colder here in Chicago than it is there in Washington, D.C. These demonstrators out actually to protest Donald Trump's day one agenda, saying that they want to protect minority rights. They're concerned about the erosion of LGBTQ rights here as well. But top of the agenda, as you mentioned, obviously, is immigration and the policy of Donald Trump, which we've already started to see being rolled out now with those executive actions and executive orders having to do with the border, having to do with immigration, and specifically here in Chicago, the threats, which now has been walked back a bit. We're not sure this will happen this week or not, but of maybe some deportation rates taking place here among the undocumented community. I have a guest here. I just want to ask you a quick question. We have Cristobal Cavazos of Immigrant Solidarity DuPage. You've been speaking with people in the community here, those who are also undocumented. What have they been telling you about Donald Trump's immigration agenda and potential action in terms of deportations?
Well, they feel a big insult. There's people around here, people in the march today that have been here for 30 years, for 40 years, for 25 years, and not just twiddling their thumbs. People in Chicago, we have a lot of food manufacturing, beverage manufacturing, people who have been doing essential work during COVID, essential work in the sweeping the floors, cleaning, chopping the vegetables, in California, picking the fruits and vegetables, the majority of workers, undocumented workers. So we know our value here, and that's why we're out here fighting, because if we don't fight, there's not going to be any respect. Donald Trump has put a lot of insults to our community, but what we're showing today with our solidarity is we have a great self-respect here, and we're not going to let anybody do us to be a bully to us.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. And it's really interesting to see, of course, Katrina, given all the fear and unease, specifically here in Chicago, because of all that talk about some potential immigration enforcement, hundreds of people out on the streets, and many of them, we were speaking with them, are undocumented themselves. So folks saying, it's important that they come out today on Inauguration Day to make their voices heard and to support immigrants, whether they're documented or undocumented.
Okay, Carl Nassman there in Chicago. Thank you for that. I just want to get a final quick thought at this point from our panellists. To you first, Stephanie. On that notion of immigration, and we don't know exactly what's going to come in terms of movements for the rest of the day, is that something that you think there is a sense of fear around?
I think it depends on who you ask. There are certainly a significant number of the American people who want to see reasonable immigration policies implemented. And particularly, there's broad support for targeting folks who are not only here illegally, but are committing crimes. I think the support begins to erode based on most recent polling by CNN. It begins to erode a bit when it comes to taking away birthright citizenship or some of the other things that the Trump administration has proposed. What I will note, though, is just in the final remarks here is that, the speech took place in the rotunda, and one of my favorite carvings in the rotunda is of Cleo. She is riding on the chariot of time. Essentially, she's in the car of history, and she's standing in this chariot, and it's a reminder that history is being recorded as time progresses. And I think that that is true in this case with this presidency. Today's day one, but history will be watching and recording what this administration actually succeeds beyond what the rhetoric that they issued today.
And Rodney, just a quick thought from yourself as well. What's your high point at this part of the day so far?
It has been a privilege to be able to serve in Congress, just like Steph, and she's right. There's so much history in a place like the Capitol Rotunda, Statuary Hall, where the lunch is happening today. I've never actually had it smell so good. It was so floral when I was walking through there today. But one thing that matters in life and in that historical record are results. And Donald Trump had results in reducing illegal immigration. And when you want to look at the results, Donald Trump talks about what he wants to do to reduce what America has witnessed over the last 4 years at our southern border. And he's already seen some of those results. If you are a convicted criminal who has entered this country illegally, yes, you should be scared that you're going to be sought after and sent back to the country of your origin. That is something that Donald Trump promised to do, and frankly, a good number of Americans across all demographics, across all races, everywhere in this country said he wanted them to do. These are the issues that he promised to address. And when you go through this initial steps of his presidency, when you start to look at executive orders, we can begin to go through each and every one of those line by line. But in the end, you have to take it through a prism of what do his supporters who sent him back to the White House want the most, and he is going to try to address it. It was in his speech today. It was in his speech to his supporters afterwards, just a different way of saying it in a different tone, and it will be in the many speeches for the rest of tonight.
And indeed, we are expecting him to sign some of the documents relating to some of those actions when he gets to the Capital One arena a little later, and another set of signings that will happen in the Oval Office a little bit after that. Thanks to you both for being with us. Rodney Davis, former Republican congressman from Illinois, and Stephanie Murphy, former Democratic congresswoman from Florida. Well, we have plenty more to come for you still during the programme here. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance are currently having lunch in the Capitol here behind us, and after that they will move along with many of the other set pieces of today, and then he'll get down to that all-important work that he has flagged. So do stay with us here on BBC News.